In some of my other videos, I've shared a little bit of my personal history, specifically having had some kind of a major life-changing spiritual experience back in 1979 when I was 31. And that led me within a year to become basically a Pure Land Buddhist oriented toward looking to Amida and recognizing the efficacy of other power as opposed to my own self-power or personal self-ability to pursue the Bodhisattva path. In any case, as I try to connect with institutional kinds of entities vis-a-vis my interest in Shin Buddhism, there were two people in particular that I would credit with having welcomed me, encouraged me, and provided opportunities for me really to be exposed to Shin Buddhism on a wider scale in its wider Sangha context. I've spoken a lot, I think, or at least some, about Reverend Tsuji, who was a former bishop of the Buddhist Churches of America and who later became the minister at the Ikoji Buddhist Temple in the Washington, D.C. area. Given the fact that I live in the southeast of the United States, this was a great opportunity for me to be exposed to the Sangha, given the fact that, California is a long ways away from where I live, and most of the BCA temples essentially then and perhaps now are out west, although that's not exclusively true anymore. Anyway, Reverend Tsuji made a point of extending himself on an outreach basis to us converts who were in the hinterlands and weren't near any particular temple, and he kind of brought us under his wing. And I've said some things about how he did that, one notable one of which was to encourage me to attend a national conference of the Buddhist Churches of America in Fresno, California, which was a wonderful experience for me. Out in Fresno, I met Dr. Al Bloom, who I have tremendous respect for having been one of the first people, I think, in the Western world as a convert, as opposed to having a heritage in the Japanese culture, to appreciate and to promulgate the teachings of true Pure Land Buddhism. And I also had an opportunity to encounter Al Bloom at a conference in the eastern part of the United States in Virginia. And since I'm now, with permission, reciting some of his writings that are essentially online pieces, I thought it might be apropos to share some detail about the conference that I attended in Richmond, Virginia. And the way I can do that is I was actually tasked at the time to take minutes for that conference. And so what I'll do here is to read those minutes or recite those minutes to you to get a flavor of what was going on at that time in this particular pocket of our wider Buddhist Sangha. I will merely modify it to the extent that where I see surnames or last names, I'll just use the initial of those folks, except for in the case of Reverend Tsuji and Dr. Bloom. It was referred to as Turning the Wheel of the Dharma, a conference with Dr. Alfred Bloom. On April 28 and 29, 1990, approximately 30 to 35 Buddhists gathered in Richmond, Virginia for a Mid-Atlantic Region conference under the sponsorship of the Ikoji Buddhist Sangha. Those present expressed much gratitude to Reverend Kenryu T. Tsuji for organizing this stimulating and enlightening event. Dr. Alfred Bloom, Dean of the Institute of Buddhist Studies in Berkeley, California, gave the keynote address and also served as the primary source of, quote, expert input, close quote, regarding the many and various questions and issues that were raised in the course of the two-day conference. As reflected in his comments quoted below, he shed much light on the topic of spreading the Dharma in the United States. The participants at the conference represented a wide range of ages, races, geographic origins, and spiritual perspectives. There were Zen Buddhists, Shin Buddhists, and Pure Land Buddhists present, as well as some who are still evolving their specific identification within this array of the Buddha's 84,000 teachings. Discussion sessions were moderated by Dr. Richard M. of Richmond, Virginia, Dr. John E. of Morganton, North Carolina, Mr. John M., President of the Ekoji Sangha at Richmond, and Dr. Chow Hun C. of Richmond. Jack M. of Roanoke, Virginia, and Marilyn S. of Richmond assisted Reverend Tsuji during the meditation and chanting sessions. Mrs. Tsuji, with the help of others, provided excellent and much appreciated vegetarian meals for those present at the conference. There was strong agreement among the participants with Mr. M.'s statement that, quote, "The U.S. needs the Dharma. There is a great future for Buddhism in the South," close quote. Dr. Bloom expressed the view that this society needs Buddhism as an alternative, close quote. He also spoke of the importance of Buddhist-Christian dialogue, with the idea that Buddhists can give, quote, "new meanings and fresh interpretations to their symbols," close quote, just as Buddhists can learn from other traditions. Making reference to the famous parable in the Lotus Sutra, Mr. M. dramatically put it this way, quote, "We're in the burning house. It's on fire. We need Buddhism," close quote. While there was agreement on the notion that there is value in Buddhism for America, as the conference discussions evolved, there was spirited debate on two key questions related to the topic at hand, as follows. How active should American Buddhists be in propagating the Dharma? What should be the style of such propagation? Dr. E., a Shin Buddhist, advocated a much more active approach and indicated his interest in the establishment of a, quote, wider Shin Buddhist fellowship organization with the goal of, quote, reflecting Amita's compassionate love and universal individual acceptance in the world, close quote. Those with a Zen orientation seemed more comfortable with keeping efforts at a low-key level. These polemics led to a clarification of some of the differences between Shin and Zen, as well as some of their similarities. Dr. Bloom reflected to the group that differences in emphasis, e.g., enlightenment/wisdom, in Zen versus faith in Amita's compassion in Pure Land Buddhism, created controversy among historical contemporaries like Dogen and Honen. Dr. C., a Pure Land Buddhist, articulated an integrating view, reminding the group that, quote, "We Buddhists try to cure people's sickness. Zen and Pure Land are different methods, but the goal is the same," close quote. He brought up the teaching that if a person is Zen and Pure Land, he/she is like a, quote, tiger with horns, very powerful, close quote. Dr. Bloom pointed out that both approaches help reduce ego, and that Dogen's idea that there is, quote, nothing to accomplish is very much like Shinran's belief in Amita's acceptance of us, quote, just as we are. He further voiced the opinion that, quote, we should support each other, regardless of path. In his extensive remarks, however, Dr. Bloom clearly indicated that, quote, the essence of Buddhism is mission. Mahayana Buddhism has a deep and pervasive sense of mission, close quote, as embodied in the Bodhisattva ideal. Quote, Mahayana adapts to the style of life of people where it goes. It melds into the life of the people and becomes a part of the culture. The wheel of Dharma is a wheel. It goes someplace, close quote. While warning against, quote, rigid dogmatism or fanaticism in promoting our ideas, Dr. Bloom emphasized that Buddhists should, quote, reach out and share. This is a layman's tradition, close quote, as exemplified by Vimalakirti, a fact that has not always been comfortable for religious professionals. Several references were made by Dr. Bloom to the Lotus Sutra, which he ranks as one of the greatest religious works of all time. In that profound and wonderful text, the Buddha makes his second great role of the inconceivable Dharma wheel, the first having been at Deer Park shortly after his enlightenment. In the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha predicts that all his followers will become Buddhas, and reveals that he himself is an eternal Buddha, living forever in the service of relieving suffering among sentient beings. Dr. Bloom pointed out that, quote, the perspective of Buddhist outreach is expanded in this sutra. All means are to be used to guide beings to ultimate enlightenment, with a goal of universal enlightenment. Dr. Bloom described the concept of upaya, or tactful use of various teaching devices, as follows, quote, "We give what's non-threatening until a person is ready for other explanations. We have to use images. This is compassion in action, presenting the teachings where that person is at. It's not elitist, not authoritarian," close quote. As it says in the Tactfulness chapter of the Lotus, "All of the Tathagatas, by infinite tactful ways, save all creatures to enter the Buddha's faultless wisdom. Of those who hear the law, not one fails to become a Buddha. This is the original vow of the Buddhas, quote, 'By the Buddha way which I walk, I desire universally to cause all creatures to attain the same way along with me,' close quote. Though the Buddhas in future ages proclaim hundreds, thousands, kotis, countless schools of doctrine, in reality they are all but the one vehicle. The Buddhas, the honored ones, know that nothing has an independent existence and that Buddha seeds spring from a cause, so they reveal the one vehicle." Placing such teaching efforts into perspective relative to their purpose, Dr. Bloom underlined the idea that, quote, "The real goal of any teaching is to help people to attain enlightenment. The teachings were always with a goal in mind, to help teachers teach, or to help people develop their potential for enlightenment," close quote. Thus, in affirming the legitimacy and importance of active efforts to teach and share the Dharma, Dr. Bloom noted that Buddhism has both an, quote, "inward/transformational aspect and an outward aspect," close quote. To be realistic, however, Dr. Bloom acknowledged that, quote, "The effort has to be undertaken with recognition of the pluralistic competitive religious environment in which we find ourselves, and the highly developed complex Western culture. It'll take time to take root. It's not easy for a religion to penetrate an existing culture," close quote. But in response to a conference participant who raised the possibility that America is not, quote, "fertile for the spread of Buddhism at this time," Dr. Bloom referred to the famous Christian parable, arguing that we must plant the seeds and not worry too much about the results. Some, or even many, may not grow, but some seeds will. In terms of style and approach to teaching/sharing, Dr. Bloom said Buddhists should use Shinran as a model. Quote, "Recognize that people need to have hope, no matter what their religious practice abilities. Nurture people by helping them grow in their spiritual understanding. Allow the teachings to evolve so everyone can grow without dependence on a teacher. Free people for the experience of their faith," close quote. In terms of Shin, the idea of Pure Land provides reassurance that, as Dr. Bloom indicated, quote, "In death not all is lost. One can fulfill oneself," close quote. Shinran would say, quote, "I'll meet you in the Pure Land," close quote, when talking with folks who were suffering. But as Dr. Bloom noted, quote, "It's a different matter in the Kyogayo Shinsho. There, Pure Land equals nirvana equals extinction. In any case, the deeper you get into religion in this life and experience Amita's embrace, the less you worry about later," close quote. In the spirit of Shinran's attitude that, quote, "We are just bamboo," close quote, propagation efforts should be carried out with a sense that, quote, "We have something to share, but nothing to claim," close quote. This attitude will lead us to find ways that are consistent with Buddhist ideals. The lack of demand that others adhere to a particular idea and the implicit acceptance of people, quote, "as they are," is one key thing Buddhism can offer our society. Dr. Bloom informed the group that Buddhism in China and Japan has traditionally, up until the 1940s, been tied in with the state and its desire to maintain power over the people. In America, Buddhism has always been free. Dr. Bloom hypothesized that this freedom may result in stronger movement toward the development, already underway in places like Sri Lanka and Japan, of a, quote, "socio-ideology." An example would be the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. Such a movement would be on a scale so as to represent a major rolling of the great Dharma wheel, perhaps on the same order as the development of Mahayana or Vajrayana Buddhism. When the conference participants got around to discussing books that can be helpful in clarifying the teachings, several were recommended, including Dr. Bloom's bestseller, Tanisho, A Resource for Modern Living, and Reverend Tsuji's classic brief overview, An Outline of Buddhism. Dr. Bloom is also sponsoring a correspondence course in Shin Buddhism in Modern Culture through the Institute of Buddhist Studies. A wealth of material is, of course, available at the Buddhist bookstore, operated by the Buddhist Churches of America. Dr. Bloom shared his belief that Buddhism should be demystified, that is, made less complex, and that it should be studied in an historical context. Quote, "Read the text and study what was going on in order to get the best interpretation. What was bothering the writer? See things in context to determine whether the issues are relevant to us. Find touch points in the culture you're addressing to explain concepts. Give people hope and meaning." Close quote. Meanwhile, he also advocated popularization of Buddhist writings, that is, communicating scholarly perspectives using less technical terms. Quote, "There's tremendous potential and power in the written word. We don't have to convert, just inform. I urge people to write and put it out there." Close quote. In addition to the primary focus on questions related to spreading Buddhism in America, conference participants discussed and clarified several Buddhist concepts and practices that can be difficult for Americans to grasp, such as sunyata, the purpose of Nembutsu recitation, whether Amida represents, quote, deification of the Buddha, levels of meaning of Amida and the Pure Land, the role of, quote, sitting, the meaning Buddhists invest in icons, etc. This was certainly a worthwhile gathering of intense and open sharing of views. Again, thanks to Reverend Tsuji. Namo Amida Butsu. So, hopefully my minutes from that conference will sort of take you behind the curtain or give you a sense of what was going on among this group of Buddhists of different persuasions, and most importantly, in the current context, give you a sense of who Dr. Alfred Bloom is and how he presented himself in the context of this type of endeavor, namely to bring Buddhists of diverse views together and to encourage and give us hope that our efforts at spreading the Dharma and turning the great wheel are worthwhile, even though it may take time for them to bear fruit.